Hey, welcome back to Developer Roadmaps. So we've already laid down the groundwork for page structure. Now it's time to move beyond just, positioning boxes and really get into the artistry of CSS, styling the actual content that lives inside them. Right, so in our last explainer, you got the hang of how elements are displayed, how they're positioned, and even how they stack up on top of each other. That's the architecture, the skeleton. Now let's put some flesh on those bones and dive into making the content itself. The text, the images, the data look amazing and work intuitively. Okay, so here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to start with the absolute building blocks, lists and tables. Then we'll get a lot more visual working with images and backgrounds. After that, we're going to unlock some serious creative power with filters and blend modes. And finally, we'll explore the magic of what's called pseudo-elements. All right, first up, let's tackle the elements that organize, well, a huge chunk of the web's information. Getting lists and tables right is it's fundamental to creating clear, readable interfaces. Just look at this. On the left, you've got your plain default browser list. I mean, it's functional, sure, but pretty boring, right? Now, look at the right. With just a couple of lines of CSS, it's totally transformed into this clean, intentionally designed element. This really shows you the immediate impact a little thoughtful styling can have. So how do we actually do that? Well, we've got three main tools in our toolbox. List style type lets you change the default marker. You can go from a dot to a square or from numbers to Roman numerals. If you want total control, list style image lets you use any image you want as the marker. Pretty cool. And then there's list style position, which decides if that marker sits inside or outside the text block. It's a small detail, but it makes a huge difference for alignment. Okay, now let's talk tables. By default, table cells have their own separate borders, which can look a little, clunky. Honestly, the single most important property for a modern table design is border collapse. Setting it to collapse just merges all those borders into a single clean line. Instantly, your table just looks way more professional. Here's a quick win for user experience. When you're looking at a big table full of data, it can be really tough for your eyes to track a single row all the way across the screen. So by using the hover pseudo class to add a subtle background color change, you give the user this immediate visual cue. It's such a simple touch, but it dramatically improves readability. All right, we've hit checkpoint 2 on our roadmap. Let's shift gears from structured data to rich visuals. This is where CSS really starts to feel less like code and more like a powerful design tool. Okay, let's talk about the #1 rule of modern web design. Your site has to work on any screen size. And this simple CSS rule you see here, it's the key. Max width 100% tells the browser, hey, this image should never be wider than its container, but feel free to shrink it down. That's the crucial difference from just width 100%, which can stretch and distort images. Then height auto makes sure it scales proportionally. Seriously, this is non-negotiable for the modern web. Now, what's really cool is that the background image property isn't just for one single image. You can actually stack multiple layers just by separating them with a comma. And the first one you list is the one that appears on top, exactly like layers in Photoshop or Figma. You could have a solid color base, then maybe a semi-transparent gradient, and the pattern on top of it all. This lets you create these really rich, complex backgrounds with nothing but CSS. So what about when you have an image that needs to fit into a very specific box, like a square avatar for a profile picture? That's where object fit is a lifesaver. Instead of just squishing or stretching the image to fit, you can tell it to cover the area, cropping parts if needed, or to contain itself inside the box, which might leave some empty space. It gives you total control over how your images are composed. Okay, now we're getting to the really fun stuff. This next section is all about these incredible effects that used to be exclusively for graphic design software like Photoshop, but now we can do them right in the browser with CSS. The filter property is it's incredibly powerful. You can apply effects like grayscale, blur, or contrast, but the best part, you can chain them all together in a single line. So here, we're taking an image, turning it black and white, then adding a little blur, and finally bumping up the contrast to create this really unique stylized effect. And we did all of that without ever opening an image editor. So, blend modes, what are they? They basically control how the colors of different layers mix and interact with each other. You have background blend mode, which is for blending the multiple background layers of a single element. But then there's mixed blend mode, which is even more powerful. It blends an entire element, text and everything, with whatever is stacked behind it. This is how you get those cool effects where text seems to knock out the image behind it, or where two images blend together artistically. Have you ever seen that frosted glass look in modern UIs? Where a panel seems to blur everything behind it? Well, that is backdrop filter. It uses the same filter functions we just saw, but instead of applying them to the element itself, it applies them to the area behind the element. It's fantastic for things like modals and navigation bars. Just a heads up though, it's a newer property, so you should always check on browser support before you go all in. Okay, just a quick but important word of warning here. These effects are absolutely stunning, but they can be pretty demanding on the browser's rendering engine. If you're applying a complex filter or a blend mode, especially during an animation, it can sometimes cause your site to lag. So just use them wisely and always test for smoothness on different devices. All right, for our final section, we're going to dive into a concept that's a little more abstract, but it is so incredibly useful: creating stylistic elements that don't even exist in your HTML file. Say hello to before and the after. The best way to think of them is like two extra stylable slots that CSS gives you for every single element on your page. They aren't real HTML elements, you won't see them in your markup, but you can style them to add things like shapes, icons, or decorative lines. This really reinforces a core principle of good web design, keeping your presentation, the style, separate from your content's structure. And this slide right here shows you their value perfectly. On the left, we had to add extra span tags just to style those decorative quotation marks. I mean, it works, but it clutters up the HTML. Now look at the right. We're using a simple block tag and adding the quote marks with the dash before pseudo-element. The HTML is totally clean and semantic, and all the styling is handled right where it belongs in the CSS. And this is where it all clicks into place. You can combine these pseudo-elements with pseudo-classes. Those are keywords for special states, like hover. For instance, you could create a decorative underline using W after that only shows up when you hover over a link. It's a really powerful way to build these dynamic, interactive details using only CSS. No JavaScript needed. So let's recap. We've learned how to style our content, how to apply some really advanced visual effects, and even how to add decorations without touching our HTML. But great design isn't just about the looks. It's built on a solid foundation of structure. So what's next on our roadmap? We're going to move from styling the content inside the boxes to mastering the layout of the boxes themselves, using the most important layout tools in modern CSS, Flexbox and Grid. This is Developer Roadmaps. Map your path. Build your career. Thanks so much for joining me, and happy coding.